Mark Carney's response was the part that stunned everyone. He didn't beg, he didn't bargain in public, he didn't rage on television. He picked up a pen. And what he signed within the last 12 hours is poised to reshape the global economy for a generation. The shockwaves are already moving through Wall Street, through European markets, through energy futures, and straight toward your bank account. Trump is furious. Congress is rattled, and a lot of the media is still chasing the wrong headline. In the next few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly what Carney just did, why the White House didn't see it coming, and why the world you wake up to tomorrow may be fundamentally different from the one you fell asleep in last night. So let's rewind 72 hours and trace how we got here, because it started with silence, and that silence should have been a warning. After the first tariff standoff, after Carney publicly rejected Trump's ultimatum, most people expected fireworks. Cable news planted cameras outside the Canadian embassy. Reporters refreshed Truth Social like it was a heartbeat monitor. Everyone waited for the next blast. Instead, Ottawa went dark. For 3 full days, no press conferences, no leaks, no dramatic statements. The Prime Minister's office offered one bland line: Canada is evaluating all available options. In Washington, that quiet was interpreted as surrender. Fox News ran a chyron claiming Canada folds under pressure. Trump posted a midnight victory lap, calling Carney a failed banker who finally learned his lesson. Senior officials briefed reporters on background that Canada had reached out privately to negotiate. That was false. Canada hadn't called anyone. They were building something, and Washington didn't understand what it was until it was already in motion. At 6 a.m. Eastern yesterday, before markets opened, before Trump had his first Diet Coke, Mark Carney appeared at a press conference. But he wasn't in Ottawa. He was in Brussels, standing beside the President of the European Commission, while the Prime Minister of Japan appeared by live feed on a screen behind him. Carney announced 3 moves at once. Each one hit Washington like a freight train. Let's start with the one nobody saw coming: the Digital Alliance. Carney announced that Canada is joining a joint digital infrastructure and AI development pact with the European Union, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Australia. Shared data standards, shared AI safety frameworks, mutual recognition of digital intellectual property. And here is the blade. The agreement explicitly excludes the United States. Read that again. 5 major Western economies just created a technology alliance and left America out. This is unprecedented. The U.S. has been at the center of Western economic and technological architecture since 1945. And in one morning, a Canadian in a dark suit reading from index cards in Brussels pushed America outside the room. Why does that matter? Because the next industrial revolution runs on data and AI. Whoever sets the standards writes the future. If those 5 economies align regulations while the U.S. stands apart, American tech companies face a nightmare: 2 competing regulatory universes. Costs rise, market access narrows, influence declines. Receipt number 1. By noon, Silicon Valley lobbyists were reportedly flooding Capitol Hill with calls, and the market reacted. NASDAQ dropped roughly 550 points yesterday, its worst single-day decline in 14 months. Meta, Google, Microsoft all took hits, not because their products broke, but because investors suddenly realized American tech dominance is not destiny. It's a privilege, and privileges can be revoked. Now move to announcement number 2, the Canada-EU Emergency Economic Partnership. This was not a friendly memorandum, not a slow, ceremonial trade deal. Carney unveiled an emergency partnership with fast-tracked mutual recognition of standards, shared regulatory frameworks, and preferential market access. The key detail is timing. The groundwork had been laid quietly. Carney had been preparing since the day he took office. While Trump was tweeting, Carney was negotiating. While the White House celebrated, Ottawa was on encrypted calls with Brussels at 3 a.m. The result is effectively a backdoor into the European market for Canadian manufacturers, farmers, and energy producers. If the U.S. doesn't want Canadian goods, Europe just rolled out the red carpet. Receipt number 2. Within 90 minutes, the Euro-Canadian dollar pair moved more than it had in 6 months. European energy stocks jumped. Canadian oil sands companies that had been crushed by tariff fear surged as much as 9% before lunch. The money moved before politicians finished reading the press release. And then came announcement number 3, the one that made the White House go pale. the Pacific Corridor Energy Accord. Canada announced fast-tracked agreements with Japan and South Korea to redirect LNG and heavy crude across the Pacific. They are accelerating pipeline and port construction on the British Columbia coast under emergency infrastructure powers. Carney invoked national economic security to bypass environmental reviews that had stalled these projects for a decade. Read that again. The man who ran the Bank of England, who lectured the world on climate finance, just bulldozed red tape to build pipelines. Not because he suddenly stopped caring about the environment, but because he understands a brutal hierarchy. Survival comes before ideology. The message to Trump was simple. Canada will not remain a captive supplier. The era where the United States was Canada's only energy customer is ending, and the timeline is not 10 years. It's 18 months. Now here's why Washington is terrified. A large slice of the U.S. energy strategy in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast assumes Canadian crude will always flow south. American refineries were engineered for Canadian heavy crude. You don't switch inputs like changing a TV channel. Retrofitting to handle lighter crude from elsewhere costs billions and takes years. Carney knows those refineries are hostages. He doesn't need to cut off oil today. He just needs to prove he can cut it off tomorrow. Yesterday, he proved it. Receipt number 3, U.S. refinery stocks fell hard across the board. Marathon Petroleum, Valero, Phillips 66. Analysts at Goldman Sachs circulated an emergency note with a 2-word title, Supply Risk. On Wall Street, that is code for, we are not okay. Even traders who ignore politics had to pay attention because this wasn't just a headline risk. It was a structural one. When supply chains, capital markets, and energy flows are woven this tightly, any sudden attempt to punish a neighbor gets priced immediately. That's why you saw whiplash not only in equities, but in currency pairs and forward contracts. Investors began asking whether cross-border assumptions that felt permanent yesterday could become negotiable tomorrow. Once that question is on the table, volatility becomes rational, and normal becomes harder to define. So what is happening inside the White House right now? By most accounts, chaos. Not theatrical chaos, not controlled chaos. The kind of chaos where people quietly update resumes. Trump's economic team is split. One camp wants to escalate, expand tariffs, sanction Canadian banks, freeze assets, full economic warfare. Another camp says this is a catastrophe, and Carney has outflanked the U.S. on every front. They want de-escalation immediately before market damage becomes permanent. The problem is that Trump isn't really listening to either side. He's listening to instinct, and his instinct has always been the same. Never back down, never apologize, double down, and attack. He has posted non-stop calling Carney a puppet of European socialists, dismissing the EU partnership as a joke, and once again floating the idea of pulling the US out of NATO. He has threatened sanctions on Canadian banks, the same Canadian banking system that is regularly rated among the most stable in the G7, and that survived 2008 without a single major failure, while American banks fell like dominoes. But here's what Trump is not doing. He is not picking up the phone. He is not sending a serious envoy. It is all fist and no handshake, and the world is watching, and the world is drawing conclusions. Now let's talk about Carney's strategy, because it is genuinely sharp. And I'm not saying that as an endorsement. I'm saying it as someone who studies power. Carney understands something Trump doesn't. In the 21st century, economic power is not only about size, it's about connectivity. The US is the largest economy on Earth, yes, but being the biggest matters less if everyone else learns to route around you. Think of it like the internet. Carney is building a bypass. He's not trying to beat the United States in a single confrontation. He's trying to make the United States optional, and that is far more dangerous than any tariff line. Trump understands transactions. You give me this, I give you that. He does not understand networks. When you bully one node in a network, the other nodes reorganize. They find new paths, build new connections, and once those connections exist, they don't vanish when the bully stops. They become permanent. Every trade link Carney signs this week is another nail in the coffin of automatic U.S. economic centrality, not because any single deal replaces the American market, but because together they prove the U.S. is not the only game in town. And once the world believes that, really believes it, Washington's leverage, built over 80 years starts to evaporate. That is what the White House doesn't grasp. They think this is a negotiation. It isn't. It's a restructuring. Carney isn't negotiating with Trump. He's negotiating with the future, and Trump isn't even in the room. Now let me tell you why you should be scared. Not concerned, scared. Because the consequences aren't theoretical. They are already arriving. If you live in Michigan, your economy is welded to an auto supply chain that crosses the Canadian border constantly. That chain is now under threat. Every day this drags on, manufacturers explore alternatives. Mexico, overseas suppliers. Once those relationships form, those jobs don't come back when tariffs end. They are gone. If you live in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or North Dakota, your energy costs are about to become less predictable. Canadian energy flowing south helps keep heating affordable and factories competitive. If that flow is redirected across the Pacific, even partially, you will compete with Japan and South Korea for the same barrel. Costs rise, competitiveness falls. If you work in tech, the digital alliance means regulatory fragmentation. Compliance costs alone can crush mid-size firms. For the giants, it means a world where American rules are not automatically the default. That is not a trade inconvenience. That is an existential shift. And if you have a 401k, check it today, then check it again on Friday. The volatility you're seeing is not a random blip. It's repricing. The market is repricing the entire concept of American economic leadership. Decades of assumed dominance are being unwound in real time, and retirement accounts are caught in the gears. But beyond the money, something deeper is happening, something that should keep Americans awake at night. The moral authority of the United States is eroding, not because of enemies, but because of choices. When your closest ally, your neighbor, your partner, the country that shares your border, your values, and so much of your history, looks at you and concludes, "We cannot trust you," the rest of the world takes notes. Denmark takes notes. Australia takes notes. Every country that has ever relied on Washington's word runs the same calculation. If they can do this to Canada, what would they do to us? That single question reshapes alliances, trade routes, and security partnerships while we speak. This isn't just tariffs. It's the architecture of the free world. And the architecture is cracking. So where does this end? I see two paths, and almost no middle ground. Path 1. Cooler heads win. Corporate America, auto, energy, big tech, descends on Washington with a unified message: stop this now. Republican governors in border states break their silence and demand a resolution. Trump, facing market chaos and political pressure, agrees to a face-saving summit. Carney, the technocrat, offers an off-ramp, a revised framework that lets Trump claim a victory while Canada keeps sovereignty intact. The new Europe and Asia deals remain, but the immediate crisis cools. This is the hopeful path. It requires Trump to do something he has rarely done: accept a draw. Path 2. The spiral. Trump retaliates against the EU deal. He imposes secondary sanctions on European companies participating in the Canada partnership. Europe hits back, Japan reduces treasury purchases, the dollar weakens. The global economy fractures into competing blocks. Deglobalization accelerates into something that makes 2008 look like a rehearsal. Nobody wins, everyone bleeds. And the liberal international order that kept peace for 80 years finally dies, not with a bang, but with a tariff. I want to believe we're headed toward path 1. I believed that 3 days ago too, until Carney showed up in Brussels. Here is what I know for certain. The US-Canada relationship will not return to what it was. Even if this is resolved tomorrow, trust has been broken. You can't unring that bell. Canada now knows the US will treat it like an adversary when it becomes politically convenient, and Canada has now proved it has options. That changes the calculus permanently. Carney didn't merely stand up to Trump. He showed the world a blueprint, how a smaller country can fight back against a larger one without firing a shot. He used finance, diplomacy, and timing. He used networks Trump doesn't have and skills Trump doesn't value. He turned Canada's supposed weakness, dependence on the US, into leverage by proving dependence runs both ways. The question now is whether Washington learns the lesson, whether someone inside that building looks at the smoking wreckage of credibility and says, maybe we should stop treating friends like enemies. I'm not optimistic, but I've been wrong before. What do you think? Is Carney protecting Canada or gambling with the global economy? Is Trump defending American interests or torching American alliances? And when the dust settles, which country will come out stronger? The next few trading sessions matter because markets don't wait for diplomacy to catch up. They move first, they force decisions, and only afterward do politicians explain what happened. That's why this feels dangerous. Finance runs in minutes, while government runs in days. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and subscribe if you haven't yet, because the markets open in 14 hours, and what happens next could define the decade. This story is not slowing down. Don't look away.